What is up, nation? AJ Riley here with Paul Rochon for Beyond the Box. We've been off for a week because, truthfully, it's the off-season of football. There's not a ton to talk about. Kind of giving a little bit of leeway for our new show, Pride or Die, to kind of take off and hit their stride. But we are back with football and football talk. And tonight, we're not really talking professional football, Paul. We're talking college football. So why don't you let the people know what we're talking
college
about
football
tonight.
is always more exciting to me. It might not bleed on as long into Super Bowl season, but it's a more exciting topic anyways. But we're going to talk about the thing that has been disrupting college football for a while now. NIL, of course, it's the big thing, and every week there's a new headline. And interesting, as the rivalry always is Ryan Day and Jim Harbaugh recently happened to make comments pertaining to NIL on the same day last week. Or maybe they didn't make the comments on the same day, but they became public the same day. And we're going to start with Ryan Day. You see, Ryan Day has been on his hands and knees lately, and he had, which, by the way, and it depends on state law and a lot of different things, and the NCAA has their gray areas, and they're not enforcing anything anyways. But in a lot of instances, schools are not supposed to directly facilitate this anyways. But Ryan Day was on his hands and knees begging a group of basically local businessmen and potential NIL extraordinaires saying, listen, we need money and we need a lot of it just to keep our roster intact. He put a number on it, $13 million we're going to need from you guys, which is crazy. But I'm going to go through his quotes real quick, and then I'll let you take the mic and kind of kick us off here. But he said, and this is so emblematic of Ohio State's mentality forever. I've always said they're SEC light. They don't necessarily completely skirt the rules in the way that Georgia and Alabama does, but they definitely don't play anywhere near by the same set of rules that Michigan does. He says, if the speed limit's 45 miles per hour and you drive 45 miles per hour, a lot of people are going to pass you by. This is a direct quote from Ryan Day. If you go too fast, you're going to get pulled over. So he's saying they've got to find that middle ground, right? Where can we exceed the speed limit without exceeding it too much that we're going to get in trouble? But we need to exceed the speed limit to compete. He said that. And then obviously he went on. He said they've been gathering information, talking to recruits, talking to their families, getting a sense of what other schools are discussing in relation to NIL deals, probably talking to anybody that's gone to Texas A&M on a visit recently. And he said he thinks right now top shelf quarterbacks are going to cost you about $2 million in NIL money to secure their commitment. Major offensive tackles, edge rushers, they're going to cost you $1 million, which is just, it's preposterous that this is what college football is at the moment. But one thing I will give him is this is the new reality. And it may be very unbecoming to see a coach like Ryan Day out there telling local businessmen that, listen, an alumni, listen, we need money at Ohio State just to keep our roster intact, because this is a quote, one phone call and they're out the door. We cannot let that happen at Ohio State. I'm not trying to sound the alarm, he said. I'm just trying to be transparent about what we're dealing with. And to deal with it, he set that bar at $13 million. What is going on, AJ?
Well, remind me again, what does NIL stand for?
I think it stands for pay players to come to my school before they've done anything.
Sign on the dotted line and sign a professional contract before you come to my school.
It's even worse. What's crazy is it's even worse because professional contracts, there's like a lot of rules and they're binding. But NIL, you could tell a recruit, listen, come here, I'm going to give you a couple $1 million, but you can't bind him to play for your school. He can come, take your couple $1 million, and then hit the portal a year later and take someone else's couple $1 million if he wants.
It's literally the wild, wild west. It is. It's the wild, wild west. And listen, like, all transparency, to use the Ryan Day word, sure, you're being transparent to your NIL donors, but what you're also doing is now it's, okay, what we thought happened under the table is now wide out in the open. There is no more backroom deals, sign your uncle's name on this lease, but it's your car kind of thing. It is out in the open. The ugly elephant that sat in the corner of NCAA football, the cheating that has gone on, and we listen. You can say it's not there. You can say it is there. Whatever. The truth of the matter is, programs have set themselves apart in a way that not every program has done. Okay. And for Day to come out to his donors and be like, listen, I need an NIL budget of $13 million. So, however, you would like to get me that money, get it to me, or we are no longer going to be the Ohio State that you remember. It just seems like it just seems like he is putting it out there like, if I don't have success, it's because I didn't have the NIL money.
I didn't have the players.
And to me, that's not like, one, it's okay, it makes your program look terrible, but like, two, like, you as a man and as a coach, you're already making the excuses for something that hasn't even happened yet. That to me is, Ryan Day being as great of a coach as he is, that to me is already a losing mentality. It's already a losing mentality.
Well, and
if you want us to compete, you got to give us
the
the
thing
money.
is, it's different in a place like Ohio State, where he openly admitted, listen, we're going to skirt the rules. We're going to push this further than we're supposed to, than that posted speed limit. And this is, of course, it's not something new to us. It's been an open secret for how long now? But at the same time, as I said a few minutes ago, it's very unbecoming. But I will give him a little bit of credit, because this is how the game is being played right now. And there's really two schools of thought on this. And I'll use the speed limit analogy. And this has been something that, and I'm going to talk a lot more about this when we talk about Jim Harbaugh's comments in a little bit, but this is something that fans of a school like Michigan have struggled with for a long time, because the NCAA, even before NIL, is not really selective enforcement. I mean, it's been an open secret, the CAR program at Alabama, how Georgia has acquired their players. Like, everybody knows. This is not confusing. Everybody knows that it's not all kosher at these schools. This is not something that should surprise anybody. And yet the NCAA has let it go on almost entirely unchecked. They only really give programs real punishments if they're a small program, or if they fail at doing what Alabama and Georgia have done successfully. Like, you take the Ole Misses of the world in Hugh Freeze. They tried to join the game. They failed at it. They didn't win enough. They got caught with their pants down. That is a pun that's intended. I hope the people out there get that
literally
one. Those are the kind of schools that they actually punish. And they just let Nick Sabans of the world do whatever they feel like, the Dabo Sweeneys of the world, do whatever they feel like, completely unchecked. And this goes back to for a long time, fans have said, listen, if everybody's speeding and the cops don't do anything about it, is it really illegal, and should you hold yourself to that standard? And my answer is the same as the answer of the University of Michigan's has been for the last 20 years. I'm not going to act like we know that Michigan's history has not been perfectly clean for 200 years. We know that. But in the modern era, Michigan has been an exceptionally clean program, and especially since the Fab Five, and then it's just gotten cleaned up more and more from there. Harbaugh's famous statement when he was at Stanford that criticized Michigan, that also spurred continued change. In the current iteration of the school is a school that's going to follow the rules to an absolute T, and you have a coach that's going to do the same thing. And that creates an ultimatum. If everybody is breaking the rules and no one does anything about it, is there really a rule in place? We think yes. Ohio State, they haven't really cared before. Now they really don't care. Now that it's not a gray area, but it's being treated as a gray area. And we know the NCAA really, especially at this point, especially because of all the legislation that's passed, can't do much about it, but they're unwilling to do anything about it anyway. So Ryan Day says, listen, this is the game. It's rumored that Texas A&M just spent $30 million on a recruiting class to get the number one recruiting class. This is what we need to compete. It's unbecoming. It's almost dehumanizing to an aspect. But This is the modern game right now. And I'm not going to say that NIL is going to stay this way. It could get better. It could get worse. There could be changes to the rules. We could have some common sense legislation. I doubt it, but it's a possibility. I'll leave it out there. But Ohio State fans are going to sit there and say that they love this. They're going to tell you, listen, this is what it is, and we want the best players to play for us. So I'm glad Ryan Day is out there rounding up all of his allies that can donate money and say, listen, we need this money. This is what it's going to take to compete with Alabama and Georgia and Texas A&M and Clemson.
Yeah, I mean, I get that and I understand that, but here's where I get hung up on the whole situation. You are paying an 18-year-old kid that has never performed at this level. And yes, I understand that there's scouting and I understand how the preps work and, you know, the 5 stars, the 4 stars. Like, these kids are talented. I'm not knocking the potential talent that they have. But they've also been doing that in a lot of ways against high school athletes. So you want to give these guys all this money in the beginning of the year, at the beginning of their college career, when they have literally done nothing. And to me, that's extremely, extremely backwards. Now, you know I'm a baseball guy, and baseball has its own issues when it comes to contracts and service time and all that kind of stuff. But at least you're not getting this lump sum of massive amounts of money to these people who have not done anything. It's, you talk about entitlement. This is the ultimate when it comes to entitlement to me. Players going, I'm worth this. I'm not going to play for your school in the tradition that you have because you're not going to pay me enough.
And it creates, think about the locker room problems it creates, right? This is, and again, and we're not going to do this discussion today. We've done it already. This is what happens when a bunch of legislators that only care about making a splash in the news and don't know anything about the sport, about the structure of it, just go off and start changing laws willy-nilly without understanding the actual impact. Because if you go back 5 years and you talked about giving players a piece of the pie, this is not what many people intended. I'm not going to sit here and say nobody wanted this, but this was not the intention by most people. And what makes me sad is years ago, and we did it on the podcast that we used to have together, and we did it before that, just in general discussion, hanging out. I laid out a million ways you could do this without hurting the sport and with giving the players what they deserve, so that when Johnny Manziel comes out of nowhere to beat Alabama and win a Heisman and put Texas A&M on the map in a way they haven't been, that he can capitalize off that. And that doesn't hurt anybody. That doesn't hurt the sport. That doesn't hurt recruits, because how did that happen? Johnny Manziel, who was nobody before that, earned it by getting on the field and becoming a bona fide superstar. Yeah. Had NCAA football been a thing back then, he would have had a college video game cover to his name to go with his Heisman. He would have had lucrative deals everywhere, and nobody would have been hurt by it, because in all you had to do.
But don't you remember that he actually did get hurt by it?
Yes,
because didn't he get caught up in
signing autographs? And that's exactly what I'm getting at. And
but see, and that's the whole thing right here, right? When we're talking about literally name, image, and likeness, that's what you should be paid for. Not necessarily come play for me and I'll pay you this much money. Your name, image, and likeness, you know, the jerseys that have your number on them and maybe the name on the back of them, you get a cut of that. Signed pictures at autographs that people are willing to come and pay you for because you have earned it. Those things are perfectly fine. But yet we're in a situation here where it's literally a bidding war for the top recruits. And if you don't choose to go to speed, right? If you don't choose to speed, then your program's going to fall behind, shall we say. Although Michigan did kind of turn it on its head a little bit, making it to the college football playoff last year. But still, I mean...
But they did that with recruits that were not signed under this NIL era. The real
That's
ramifications for
but
this, and
I understand that.
they're being felt in this class. This is coming off a playoff appearance, finally beating Ohio State, winning the Big Ten. A lot of expectation was there for Michigan to really take off recruiting. But not having that Ryan Day approach is holding them back. It absolutely is on the trail. There's a lot of recruitments. I mean, we've talked about, and we'll get it more into this when we talk about Michigan, because we're still on Ryan Day a little bit here. So really, I guess what I need to know is Ryan Day's approach. Do you view that as optimal, or do you, knowing what you know, knowing that that's what it takes right now to get the best players? I'm not saying necessarily to have the best program, because getting talent is half the battle. You need the talent to compete. And Michigan showed that last year when they just didn't have the talent to compete with Georgia, despite a fabulous season. But knowing what you know, knowing that you need the talent, do you appreciate the Ryan Day approach, or would you still rather talk about, or would you prefer an approach that we're going to discuss in a few minutes here, of really following the rules to a T and trying to make NIL really about NIL?
No, I don't appreciate it. To me, it's second rate. It's like I said earlier. Listen, you can talk about morality, high horses all you want. That's fine. But at the end of the day, I want to be able to lay my head on the pillow and be comfortable with the man that I am. And knowing, if I were to go out and say what Ryan Day said to try and build a program, if I have to build a program and win that way, I can't lay my head on the pillow at night. Because that's not, I may not have a job, sure, that's fine. But I would rather walk out of a job with my head held high than lower myself, my standards, and everything like that to the point of begging for money so that I can compete and already throwing the excuses forward.
And that's
So no, I don't
that's the
appreciate
crazy
it at
thing
all.
to me. And that's where I'm like, to me, it's pathetic. And I know that that's harsh, especially when I just said I understand that's how the game is being played. But just because everybody else is doing something doesn't mean that you have to, right? And where it
I tell
crosses,
kids at school every day. I said, if everybody robs a bank, does it make it okay for you to rob a bank? No, it doesn't. So stop telling me that everybody else is doing it, because that's not the way that life
of course,
works.
and where it crosses the line to me to this is how the game is being played. This is, the kids are just getting their piece of the pie. Where it crosses the line from that to pathetic for me is that this is not Ohio State, like businessmen, alumni, boosters just banding together in going down, basically looking at a recruiting list and identifying guys that they want to get in touch with and saying, listen, if you come to Ohio State, this is what we can offer you. You have a actual head coach, Ryan Day, someone who in his first several years can still count his Big Ten losses on one hand. Someone that has just dominated the conference. Now, they haven't won a title. They haven't had the playoff success they've hoped to have. But they've been extremely successful since he's been there. Nobody can say they haven't. To have someone like that personally go out and tell these people, listen, I need your money, or I'm not going to be able to keep the wheels turning on this program. This is legitimate. It's the same thing as a politician going to a benefit to collect money from donors. That's what he is right now. He's saying, listen, we got to beat the other guys. I need your money to run this campaign. I need your money to have these assets. It's so, again, unbecoming to the sport, to coaches, to the program, that this is where we're at. And you can say, oh, it's the game, it's what everybody has to do, but it's not. And this is why. Because Jim Harbaugh is playing the game completely different. Jim Harbaugh's comments are completely different. He was asked about NIL and about, of course, the rumors. You hear things like Texas A&M, $30 million to sign a recruiting class. Unverified, but it's been floated out there. And would it shock anybody? No, not really, especially with some of the contracts that we've seen thrown out to these high school athletes. And Jim said, I hear a lot about it. You hear a lot about it. You talk about it. He said, I just don't know how much is real, how much of that's accurate. Is it accurate? Is it like fishtail stories? You just don't know how much of it is actually real. Jim says, I've always been for student athletes being able to profit off their name, image, and likeness, which we know that based on his track record. He's always been a player's advocate, whether it was getting rid of the transfer rule so that they could have immediate eligibility. He says, it makes sense, right? We can say the sale of a jersey. Who should have some share of the profit? Should the actual person whose jersey it is, or the institution? And Jim says, I think we can all agree that's something that's fair and right. But he says, right or wrong, our philosophy on coming to the University of Michigan is still going to be a transformational experience rather than a transactional experience. And that is both a mission statement and a shot across the bow to every other program in college football. He is simply saying, listen, the guys that we're going to recruit, we are not going to play this game. We are not going to say, listen, if you come here, we can get you $1 million in NIL money while you're here. We're not going to do that. If you come to Michigan, it's because we're going to change who you are as a person. We're going to educate you in the classroom. We're going to educate you and coach you up on the field. We are going to make you better men. We are going to make you Class A representatives of the University of Michigan, and we are going to make you a better football player. We are going to help you achieve pro aspirations because we have some of the best coaches in the world. That is what coming to the University of Michigan is going to be, first, foremost, and in finale. That's what it's going to be. You are not going to come here because we can pay you as much or more as another program. We are not going to play that game. And that will hurt Michigan on the recruiting trail. The same way academic standards and not recruiting guys who barely graduated high school has hurt them on the trail. The same way not being able to take transfers the way other schools do has hurt them on the trail. The same way not even looking at JUCOs has hurt them as a program. But Michigan is going to do things their way. And this is something that fans struggle with. Because at the end of the day, most Michigan fans, especially those that are not alumni, and there's nothing wrong with that. Not everyone has the great honor of going to the University of Michigan. There's nothing wrong with that. But a lot of alumni do hold their school in a little more esteem. They want their degree to have that value. So they're a little more stingy with it. But even a lot of alumni really care about the product on the field more than how we achieve those results. Especially fans would love Michigan to throw its weight around. This is one of the most storied programs in the history of college football. This is not a school hurting for money. This is not an alumni base hurting for money. How many billionaires went to the University of Michigan? So many. That's not the issue here. But we have chosen to play a different game. And a lot of fans don't like what they will call self-inflicted wounds. I would call it righteousness.
Well, and it's the Well, yeah, I mean, listen, it's hard not to romanticize what Harbaugh said, okay? Right? The transformational versus transactional. It's hard not to be like rah rah and like fall in love with Jim Harbaugh because of what he said, but the taking it from the fans' perspective, it's really hard to reconcile the success versus reality, right? It's really hard to reconcile the righteousness with the reality because you can't have your cake and eat it too in a situation like this. You're either going to have a national championship caliber team or you're going to have a team that plays by the rules. That's the way that it is. So if you want the national championship team, then don't talk about other teams cheating. If you want to have the program that holds the higher moral ground, let's say, for lack of a better term, then you can't complain about 9-3 and not beating Ohio State and not winning Big Ten championships. And that's, I mean, from our own personal experience, that's kind of a reckoning that I've even had to come to in my own life because, at the end of the day, competitions are meant to be won, right? There are no moral victories when it comes to sports and competition. But when you get into that transformational versus transactional, I mean, obviously that speaks my language more than probably anything else that could be said probably in the sports landscape. I appreciate that. But I'm not going to sit here and just continue to pump up the romanticized aspect of that, because it sounds good. And I hope that it does work out. But you also put a pretty large target on your back when you start talking that way and you take the moral high ground. Because when you take the moral high ground, you get yourself under a microscope and everybody starts looking at every single thing that happens within your program and the people that you bring to your program. And if they don't meet that caliber, then it's almost a worse fall than getting caught for cheating. Does that make sense? Because our society just tends to be so backwards when it comes to those types of things.
Well, you're absolutely right. And you hit the nail on the head on what kind of fan you are and the expectations you would have. And I would lay it out quite simply. It's something that Juwan Howard has said. It's something that Jim Harbaugh has said. It's something that has been reiterated for a long time. Michigan is not for everybody. And this includes fans. See, what Jim Harbaugh said, really, as I already said, is a mission statement from the University of Michigan. And it's something that he fully buys into and holds his program accountable for. That is their mission statement, to be transformative, not transactional. We're not just bringing kids in and out for money. That's not what we're going to do. It's not the Michigan way. It's never going to be us. The line in the sand has been drawn. What I ask fans to do, and it's what frustrates me the most, if you do not like this approach, I would say the same thing. Michigan is not for everybody. Nobody is forcing you to be a fan of a college football team whose values do not align with yours. You are more than welcome to jump ship to a Michigan State or an Ohio State if the way they run their program and the values that they uphold more align with yours. People out there will say, listen, I don't know, and I've heard this argument a ton. How are you taking the moral high ground? Do you really think that it's morally dubious to pay children, to pay young kids and student athletes? Do you really think that it's a problem to pay these kids that are risking their bodies? A lot of people will try to take the moral high ground that way and say, listen, they should be compensated. And it's fine if you feel like that. What I ask of you then is, instead of asking Michigan to change, that you change your allegiance. You know, I'm going to pull a Colin Cowherd here, and I'm going to make this a relationship analogy. If you were dating a girl, and you were together, I don't know, 6 months, whatever it is, and you despise a lot of the way that she operates, a lot of her daily choices, a lot of her mantras that she goes by, if you don't agree with them, and you can't reconcile them with your own values, are you going to complain about her every single day and tell her how much she needs to change? Or are you going to say, you know what? Probably not a good fit. We're going to break up, and I'm going to go find someone that is a better fit for my values and how I want to live my life. You wouldn't stay with that girl.
The classic line, right? The classic line. It's not me.
Yeah,
it's you.
Right?
It's
of course. So why
are
you staying committed to Michigan if their mission statement doesn't align with yours? And this is why it grates me so much to hear fans complain. I love the way Michigan operates. And it's not going to result in the level of success that Ohio State has, that Alabama has, that Georgia has. It's not going to. It's going to be once in a while we're going to have a great run like we did last year and still come up short on the biggest stage, most likely, outside of just having a magical team. But to me, it does matter to me how we got there. And I've talked about this before. Everyone's like, well, everyone's goal is to win. Your goal should be a national championship. Well, that's absurd, because you can cross off well over 100 Division I FBS schools that are never sniffing a title, ever. So you're going to tell me that in a sport...
Yeah, but you also have 100... I mean...
You're going to tell me...
That works...
It doesn't.
That works for a little bit. But, I mean, you've got 100 FBS schools that don't have the tradition. of winning that Michigan has
But
had.
but
So
it's not
that
about
works
tradition.
for
So
those
here's the
schools,
thing: you can't sit here and tell me that in a sport.
but
Hold on,
you
I,
understand
I
how powerful nostalgia is when it
and
comes to
this is a
Michigan
problem with the
football.
era that these fans are formed in. Whether it was the Carr era, whether it was the Bo era, whether you're ancient and
Full
somehow
era.
got to see the Fitz era, right? Whatever you were born
That
into,
was a long
it was a long time ago. Whatever you were raised with, you kind of hold those expectations, right? But things change. People
for sure.
change. The landscape of things changes. Listen, it wasn't that long ago. No, I'm sorry. It was an extremely long time ago that Princeton ran college football. If you were old enough to see that happen and then see Princeton fall into complete irrelevance and become something completely different than what they were, you have to accept that. Nobody's sitting here demanding Princeton be one of the powerhouses of college football and change their ways to meet modern college football just because a long time ago
We
they
stole
won a
one of
ton
their
of
coaches
titles, right?
way
We
back
did.
when.
No one is demanding that of them. Things change. The landscape changes. You can't sit here and tell me that in a sport where 85% of the participants could never even dream of sniffing a title, and I'm being conservative, it's really more, but 85% of these schools can never even dream of sniffing a title. You can't sit here and say everyone's got the goal of winning a title. No. That's the great thing about college sports, and especially college football, is everybody's playing for something different. Yes, technically we're all in it together, the race for the national championship, but that's not true. We know that Northwestern isn't measuring their success by a national title. We know that. And I'm not saying that we should measure our
That's why their
success
coach has been
by
there forever.
Northwestern. I'm not saying that. And as you said, we're a more storied program. We should be above the Northwesterns of the world. But as the landscape changes, as time passes, and as Michigan says this is how we're going to do things, if that mission statement affects how their program is run, the expectations have to adjust to the on-field product. And if they don't, if you cannot reconcile that with your fandom and your values, you do not have to root for the University of Michigan. Nobody is making you. I don't care if they were your childhood team. I don't care if you went to school there. If their program values no longer align with yours, leave. Don't complain and get on these forums and get on Twitter and get on Facebook and get on message boards and tell the world how bad it is, how you wish Michigan would do things differently. I got news for you. They're not going to. No matter how much you whine and complain, they're not going to do things differently. So if you don't like it, goodbye. I do like it. I love the way that we do things. It sucks that it hurts us on a competitive level on the field. It sucks that it's going to be exceptionally difficult to come close to keeping pace with our chief rival, Ohio State. It is unfortunate to see how excited MSU fans are about their NIL program, although it has not resulted in recruits yet. They are getting a lot of guys to campus that they couldn't get there before. And eventually they may start signing some of them if Mel can prove that he's a decent long-term coach. The jury is still out on that, of course. That may be frustrating, but I would rather do things the way that we're doing them. And that's me. AJ, do you disagree with that?
I think that there's, how do I put it? I don't think the old sales pitches are going to work, right? But they've obviously worked enough where, like we're going to get to, you get highly touted talent like a JJ McCarthy. So are you going to get a number of JJ McCarthys in a given year? Probably not, because not all of them will buy into what you're selling. That's a tough one to answer, Paul, because man, I don't really hate many things except for losing, especially losing winnable games. And so I want to be clear here. I don't want to talk out of both sides of my mouth. At the end of the day, I want to be able to lay my head on the pillow. So if we got to cheat to get a national championship, like the 2017 Astros, I don't want it.
I know you did that for a reason. It's ridiculous. The Astros were not relevant cheaters.
We're not getting into
Listen,
it. Don't take the bait.
It's ridiculous.
Don't take
Sign
the bait.
stealing will never stop until it's fully electronic, which we're close to.
Just do it the right way.
You
Do
can't
it the
complain
right way.
about it. Listen, they use modern
I'm going.
technology.
This is not a baseball
I
show.
know it's not. You
Not a
started
baseball
this.
show.
You
Let's go.
wanted to derail it.
No, you took the bait.
This NIL stuff is going to impact us for a long time, especially if things don't change in a better trajectory for Michigan. What it is not going to have a
Right.
major impact on is this 2022 season of college football for the University of Michigan. What is going to have a big impact is our quarterback play, especially who is under center. And this has been an issue that has been hotly contested really even during the season last year as the season went on,
Yeah.
especially once the Georgia game happened. And this is something that people will not stop just with their grating dumb opinions on. The people that don't understand quarterback play at all, people that doesn't know what goes into this decision, people that say, oh, this guy's got a stronger arm, he should probably be starting. As if we didn't just live through the Joe Milton era, the short-lived Joe Milton era, and seeing how useless a strong arm can be. Not to compare McCarthy, because I think McCarthy's going to be excellent. I think he's going to be one of the best quarterbacks ever play for Michigan, hopefully. But it doesn't mean that his time is now. Could be. We're going to find out. But I want to talk about the quarterback battle a little bit that's brewing, because it's all people talk about, especially the way recruiting's been going for Michigan on the NIL trail. Things not been heating up too much lately, so people are really just this quarterback thing. They're hammering it. So the first thing I want to talk about, and AJ, I would say that we probably are much more, let's say, level-headed than the average fan, much less emotionally invested to the outcome of this quarterback competition. What are you looking for? Like, not your preference necessarily yet, but what are you looking for in determining this? And let's do this without the cliches of, oh, Cade's the experienced vet who won a lot of games with, and JJ's the raw up and coming talent. That's not what I mean. I want when you talk about what the staff is doing and how they're going to pick the best quarterback to play this year, what kind of things are you looking for these guys to separate themselves?
So number one, I'll talk about both guys, and I'm going to start with JJ. I think if JJ wants to set himself apart, he's got to do this. And just breathe on the football field, because when that man gets on the football field, he is literally, and listen, I don't blame him, right? He's a highly talented, very fast moving individual, but every time I saw him get the ball last year, he just seemed like all over the place, right? And he just seemed like he was moving too fast for his own body. And I think what JJ has to do is be able to trust himself and find a way to slow everything down, which I understand is a cliche to an extent. But he's got to find a way to be like, listen, I'm good enough to make plays happen without having to always be faster than everybody. I've got to be able to set up blocks. I've got to be able to sit in the pocket for an extra beat, maybe, so that that window comes open and I can use my strong arm to hit that, deep in route or the deep out route, whatever the case may be. Because I'd have to go back and look, because I haven't really watched the tape, but I feel like he was very quick to exit pockets last season, which is detrimental to a quarterback. I also felt like there were probably times, if I'm just reminiscing, where our eyes were more on the rush than they were downfield, which, again, detriment to a quarterback. And then we just got to find a way to protect the football. For Cade, I think he takes the experience that he gained in Georgia, where he literally looked like a shell of himself and kind of deer in the headlights, and uses that to build upon. Like, okay, I've seen, as we've talked about, one of the historically best defenses of all time. I got zero help from my offensive line. I got no help from my wide receivers who were dropping passes. So let me use that experience to level up my game a little bit. I've got this, freshman, sophomore that's going to be pushing me. So I need to see Cade more consistent on shorter passes, you know, better timing in the pocket, I think, is going to be and quicker decision making, because I felt like he held on to the football just a little bit too long sometimes. JJ got rid of it quick, and Cade did not get rid of it quick enough sometimes. And so I think finding the middle for both of those guys is what's going to, if one of them can find the middle, is going to set them apart.
See, for me, as you said with JJ, but again, in broad strokes, right? I want to see him play within the system more. JJ loves to play off schedule, which at times can be awesome. It's hard for a defense at times to defend off schedule. When you can extend a play that was covered and was dead,
but not every
and when
play.
you can extend it, that's great. The problem is people see this and they're like, oh, he extends the play, he's always making things happen. The plays exist for a reason. And off schedule is never going to be consistent. You can't run an offense off schedule. That's why offensive coordinators and brilliant X and O minds get paid so much money. Because if you can play within the system, a lot more of your good plays are going to happen within the design play, within the parameters of that play. That's how you have a consistently great offense, where we're moving the chains, where we're putting points on the board, where we're finding the end zone more regularly, or at least getting in field goal range, or at least not going 3 and out all the time. When you go off schedule, you give the defense a lot more opportunity. Yes, you stress them a little bit, but you also give them more opportunity to punish you for mistakes and make big negative offensive plays. And when you go off schedule early, which is something that you mentioned, you completely take the system out of it. Even in the best offenses with a quarterback that is just completely makes things up on the fly, at least 80% of your good plays are going to come within the system. If you are bailing on the play early, you're throwing that out the window. And now you have to make something happen on the fly, which again, not a consistent way to run an offense. So I need to see him play within the system. I love the splash plays. I love when he rolls out to his right and drops a 50-yard pass across the field, across his body. Like, it's super cool to watch. It's fun. It's exciting, right? But at the same time, it's horrifying. Because you can't have a consistent offense that way.
It's horrifying.
And whether the result is good or not, the result being good is almost worse. Because it reinforces negative traits.
Then he does it again.
Because you got away with it. Right. Or you did better than get away with it. You succeeded in spite of it. There's a time and place for it.
What's the number one rule of a quarterback? Never throw over the middle late.
Of course. Now, there's a time and place.
Over the middle late, and when you're rolling out to the right.
Risk management is so important for a quarterback, and I don't just mean on any given pass. Listen, if it's 4th down and your back's against the wall and you need this conversion, I get extending the play, bailing, throwing something up for grabs. There's a time and a place. And we need to play within the system as much as possible. It's exciting to watch guys that don't, but it's less consistent and you will have less overall success. So I need to see him play within the system. Cade, I need Cade to play with an offensive play caller that actually calls plays that suit him and are tailored to him. And listen, people that ever listen to our podcast, people that have ever talked with me about Michigan football, I have not disliked a Michigan coach as much as I dislike Josh Gaddis in so long. It's been Brady Hoke era, I think, honestly. I do not like Josh Gaddis. Did not like the way that he ran a game. I think the introduction of Weiss last season and getting guys like Sharani more and more involved, I think that helped him a lot. But man, it was really up and down with him at the helm. And last year, when we finally had success, it was getting away from what he came here to do. But the problem is when we did pass the ball, I don't want to get into the play calling thing too much. My hope is that Weiss, and this is a complete unknown, but my hope is that the Weiss and Moore offense looks a lot different and is truly tailored to whoever they have on the field. Because I think Josh Gaddis did a poor job of that. And I want them to take the things that Cade does well. Take his pre-snap recognition, which he's excellent at. Take his ability to hit the intermediate throws and highlight those, because he will. Take his ability to catch a guy on a slant with a really accurate ball early, before the defense has time to react. Look at what we did, how we opened the game against Michigan State last year. You got Anthony Edwards, true freshman, takes a quick slant, 75 yards to the house, whatever it was. How did that happen? Timing, quarterback recognized it early,
3-step drop.
perfect pass in stride. Not a long pass. He didn't have to go deep with it. Short to intermediate. It's like a medium pass, but even on the shorter side of medium. Perfectly in stride, defense can't catch him. He's gone. Listen, Ohio State abused Michigan on crossers for multiple years in a row. All right, you don't need a rocket arm to complete those passes. You need a smart quarterback that understands the system inside and out, knows exactly where his guys are going to be when they're going to be there, in an anticipation throw that's in stride. Now, Cade struggled at times. He wasn't perfect. Let's remember, Cade was a first-year starter last year. A first-year starter. Everyone talks about the growth that McCarthy may have. What about the growth that Cade may have, going from his first-year starting to his second-year starting?
Right.
A quarterback that, whether you think it was because of him or in spite of him or somewhere in between, that beat Ohio State and won a Big Ten title. And I'm the first one to tell you that wins are not a quarterback stat. They're not. But we had an extremely successful offense last year with Cade, and an offense that I think could have been a lot better. I want to see Cade, listen, better accuracy on the deep balls. You have to. Take a little more risk. Don't be afraid of the downfield shots, right? Get that as a more consistent thing in your game. But also playing within this system.
Especially on first and second down.
A system that is hopefully more tailored to him. Now, with all that being said, do we have a preference? Do you have a preference on who you would... obviously, and don't say the best quarterback. Because I promise you,
I won't.
Of course we want the best quarterback to play, right?
Take.
But do you have a preference?
And I think that the best quarterback is going to play. I do. And I've told you from the beginning of last season, this situation is oddly reminiscent of another Michigan situation from years back. Do you recall? Okay. And I'm not saying that Cade McNamara is Tom Brady. So let's be very clear about that. But Tom Brady deserved his chance and got overtaken and had to split time with the hot prospect talent. Okay? Drew Henson. My preference is Cade. Because JJ was not ready last year. Like, honestly, I don't even know if JJ should have seen the field last year. And I don't know how much that kind of messes with the psyche of Cade. So my preference is Cade because Cade gets bagged on a lot, right? Because in the first few games, he didn't have like over 200 yards passing or something because they rushed for like 1,000,000 yards in the first like 3 games. He didn't
300 yards a game we were rushing for.
And then
300 yards a game.
Right. And the thing for me is like the knock on Cade is like the big games. Well, in the big games this year, he played his best. He had 384, I think it was, against Michigan State. I mean, Ohio State was colder, but I think he got up there too. But again, we didn't really need him to throw that much against Ohio State because we ran the ball.
And he was money when he did. He made one. He made one bad mistake against Ohio State. It was an inexplicable interception,
and that was the interception over the middle.
It can't happen, and that's
at the beginning of the game.
A lot of things people like to talk in these stupid cliches of Cade's the safe choice because he doesn't make mistakes. And then if someone does say that, someone else will be like, oh well, look what he did against Ohio State. He's not immune to mistakes. Well, no quarterback is, but those are things you learn from, and he rebounded to have a really nice game.
Yeah. He did have a nice game. And then, deer in the headlights against Georgia, but best defense in the history of college football, I'm not upset about that. So my preference is Cade. I think that he gives them the best opportunity to win as a second-year starter.
To have a consistent offense, right? That's what we want the most. I don't want an up-and-down offense. To me, it's a very hard question to answer. So I'm going to answer, I have football reasons, but it's less about the on-field stuff to me because I very much believe, and we'll get to this in a minute, but I very much believe that this staff is going to play whichever quarterback is better. Like it is absurd to me that people don't think that way. That people honestly think that Jim Harbaugh or Weiss or Moore are going to play one option, say Cade, just because they think he's safer and has a higher floor. That's ridiculous. It's not going to happen. And McCarthy wouldn't have gotten the run that he got last season if that was the case. It would have never happened. They were preparing him to compete and possibly take over this job. Listen, there's nothing in the world that they want more than J.J. McCarthy to come in and just be the best quarterback in the world and take the job and say, listen, Cade's great, but I'm better. And you have to play me because I'm better and I'm going to lead you to the promised land. Of course, that's what they want. I prefer Cade for, really honestly, personal reasons. And fans never learn. I mean, they legitimately never learn. We just had the Joe Milton era where we saw the high upside, uber talented guy. He's a mobile quarterback with the strongest arm in college football. And we saw how poorly that went because he didn't have the requisite football skills and understanding and savvy, right? And J.J. McCarthy is not that. J.J. McCarthy's finished product at Michigan, I believe, is going to be better than Cade's finished product at Michigan. I do. I think J.J. McCarthy is a better prospect, and I think he's going to eventually be a better quarterback. I don't know that that's yet. I don't know that that's this season. I think he'll get there. And the ceiling conversation, I'm going to save a little bit for the end because that's something that just really grinds my gears. But right now, I think people have slept on Cade, as you alluded to, an absurd amount. He has not gotten credit for so many of the things he did well. Obviously, listen, we were a run-first team last year. We were. And your quarterback is not going to be promoted and put on a pedestal when you run for 300 yards a game. There's only so many yards on a football field. You only get so many possessions, right? Like, we only threw 20 times a game. Okay, we didn't throw the ball 40 times a game like Ohio State does. He's not going to have those absurd numbers. It's just not going to happen. And I already talked about an offense that wasn't necessarily tailored to him. Michigan has an amazing offense this season, like talent-wise. Our offensive line is largely intact from last season. A Joe Moorhead, they won the award for the best offensive line in college football, which I don't think they were the best offensive line in college football. I think they were the most deserving offensive line in college football. I think they played the best, especially in the biggest moments. But they were not perfect, but they were a very, very good offensive line. They returned largely intact. The guys that they lost, you could argue that they're replacing with better players. They got Olu is a transfer, a grad transfer from Virginia. Virginia Tech. He was a Remington finalist for the best center in college football. He was a finalist. That's what you brought in to replace a guy that a lot of people didn't like as center. You lose Andrew Stuber, who was a good tackle, but was considered limited. And you're replacing him with a higher upside younger guy that's been in the program for a long time. Our offensive line easily goes 10 plus deep. We are locked and loaded with talent that's ready to go. So you have an elite offensive line. Look at our skill positions, man. Are you serious? Like, a guy that probably wouldn't be here if he didn't get hurt last year, Ronnie Bell, comes back. You hear the reports of freshman Darius Clemens ready to set the world on fire. And look at all the returning talent that you have from last season. Guys that run 4.3s in Roman Wilson, right? Guys that can go up like Cornelius Johnson and just go get a ball. Like, we are stocked. And then you look at the running back room, which might be the best in college football. You got Donovan Edwards, a 5-star matchup nightmare. And he's not your starter. You got Blake Corum, who was arguably the best running back in college football last year before he got hurt. This is this much offensive talent and a play caller that people cannot say, really two play callers, Matt Weiss and Sharon Moore, that people cannot say enough positive things about. Led offensively by Jim Harbaugh, who you know how I think about his offensive acumen. That is an offense that is set up to just score points and score them consistently. I think Cade, this season, if he starts, is really going to show people how great he is, how great he can be at not just being a steady hand. I think he'll be a steady hand, but at maximizing this offense, and really another year for J.J. McCarthy to see what it takes and get fully ingrained in the system. So when his all-world talent is fully ready to get the reins next season, that he's had 2 full years to absorb all this in Cade's leadership. That's my preference. I want people to see what Cade is, and I want Cade to prove what he is. Listen, he didn't break all those Nevada State records because he's afraid to throw the ball. He didn't. This is not some unheralded 2-star recruit out of BFE that didn't do anything in high school. Cade is a very good prospect, And just because he doesn't have Matt Stafford level arm strength, it doesn't mean that he can't take this team just as far as JJ McCarthy or further this season. So that's my preference. One thing I want to be very clear on this is how the staff is going to play this. I know we're in lockstep here. How do you see the staff handling this competition?
To be honest with you, I think they're both going to get their run until one of them sets themselves apart. Uh, it just seems like competition is Harbaugh's thing, which fine, great, have your competition, but I don't think that competition is going to be something that's settled in practice. I think that at least through the first 3-4 games, you're going to see a lot of back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and so we got. I just think that you're going to see a lot of what you saw last year until one of them sets themselves apart.
And I think one of them will set themselves apart. As we both said, we think that they're going to take the best quarterback. Period. I have no concern in the world.
No, I don't think they're splitting time by Ohio State. And I think that what's going to end up happening is your opening day, week 1 starter is Cade McNamara, and JJ's going to get some run in that game. And I think McNamara is going to start at least the first 4 games, unless injury, of course, or JJ just comes in and has lit the world on fire. It's Cade's job to lose. He took him to the college football playoff last year. It's his job to lose.
And I think that's also exactly how it's going to go. I don't think that this is not something that I think with a lot of conviction. I think JJ could easily come in and win this job because I think he's that good. And really, it's just a matter of how quickly does he pick up the nuance of playing quarterback at the college level, and how quickly does he completely master this system and the play calls and leading the guys. That's what it is. It's not a talent thing at all. So he could absolutely come in. I think it's almost a toss-up. But if I had to decide, gun to my head, I think Cade starts week 1. I think JJ continues to get run the same way he did last year. I don't think it's going to be a multi-game back and forth battle where they get almost equal time to see who's better. I don't foresee that happening. I think Cade's going to start game 1. I think JJ is going to get run in each game just like he did last season. But I think Cade just isn't going to relinquish the job. I think he's going to be so good that he's just going to be the unquestioned starter, and that he's not going to look back for the rest of this season. He's not going to be looking over his shoulder. That's what I think is going to happen, but I don't know. And the one thing that I hate seeing people do the most, and I want to kill this right now, is just the ignorant ceiling discussion. Because the whole discussion of ceiling, it doesn't have any logical basis in reality. People say, oh, well, JJ has more talent.
I'm glad you come around.
He's got a stronger arm, so that means he has a higher ceiling. You got to play him because his finished product might be better than Cade's finished product. Well, I have news for you. Players don't reach their ceiling. It's exceptionally rare that any player or athlete in any sport actually maximizes every ounce of talent that they have. Tom Brady reached his ceiling. Tom Brady took every ounce of talent in his body and did the best you can possibly do with it. But if ceiling was that important, the entire NFL would have an arm like Matt Stafford and legs like Lamar Jackson. The strong-armed quarterbacks are a dime a dozen. They're not starting at every program across FBS football. Why? Because it's not about ceiling. Playing quarterback is difficult. And no matter how much you try to take that moldable piece of clay and mold it, no matter how good of coaches you are, playing quarterback is hard. In physical traits, listen, you want to talk about ceiling, whoever has the strongest arm and is the fastest has the highest ceiling, right? Because if they were to develop just as well as everyone else developed, they'd have an advantage in arm strength and they'd be faster, so you'd have more options with them. But we know that's not how it works. That's not how football works. If all things were created equal, the quarterback would be the best athlete on the field. All things are not created equal. They're just not. There's things that separate quarterbacks, all right? Not every quarterback, especially in college, but even in the NFL level, has a monster arm. Why? because it's not, ceiling is a nonsensical discussion that you're just assuming, oh, if we give him playtime because he has such more talent, he's going to be the better quarterback eventually. I think he is going to be the better quarterback eventually, but you don't play him because theoretically he has more talent. It's just a dumb, illogical discussion. In the moment that you say the moment you say someone has a higher ceiling is the moment I don't want to discuss with you anymore, because you're looking at things that have no bearing on who should actually be playing.
Yeah, I'm glad you actually came around on that conversation, because I remember debating ceilings and floors with you a long time ago, probably when we first met, about just how hypothetical they are. Like, you can't put a number on a ceiling. And if it's not tangible, I don't even know why it's discussable. You know what I'm saying? That's the problem that I have with the whole ceiling debate. And look, at the end of the day, here's what the reality is. Michigan's quarterback is going to be the best man that Jim Harbaugh believes can take them back to the college football playoff. That's it. That's the end of discussion. And whether it is JJ or whether it is Cade, I think we're in good hands. I think Michigan is in good hands. And that is something that you could lay your head on the pillow at night with. I can go to bed at night knowing that JJ's my quarterback. I can go to bed at night knowing that Cade's my quarterback. I'm not really going to be, upset. Oh man, Cade lost the starting job. Season's over. Forget it. Let's all pack up and go home. That's not, no, because JJ is a very talented quarterback. And so you're right. I mean, the ceiling discussion is completely nonsensical. It's unnecessary. And it won't happen here, because you finally have agreed with me on something. And I'm glad that you did. Paul, here's the deal. We will see who the quarterback of Michigan football is in the fall. And we're getting there. We're getting ever closer to football season. And Beyond the Box is going to be with you every step of the way. That's going to do it for our show tonight. He is Paul Rochon. I am AJ Riley, and we will see you next week on Beyond.
Man on a mission, I'ma get it. You know I be on a what?